Hello, Brent. How you doing?
Great, mate. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for making the time to join us today.
Hey, thanks
I
for
think I've
having me.
I think I've known you for well over 10 years now, and I've watched you skyrocket from a relatively small firm in North Sydney to being a listed top 30 firm in Australia with 15 offices and over 40 directors now, and I think 4 books under your belt.
That's right. In my spare time, I write books, Michael.
I was wondering, how do you do it? How do you stay so motivated and driven for such a long time?
That's a good question. So, Michael, when I left school, I joined Pricewaterhouse as an undergrad, and then I left there and joined an investment bank. And I ultimately lost that job. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my dad gave me a book, and that book talked about meeting people that had been successful and finding out what it was that they did. And so what I did was I wrote to 80 prominent Australians. I got their details out of a little book called The Who's Who of Australia. And
Yep.
I actually wrote to them. I said, my name's Brett Kelly. I'm 22. I'm unemployed, but I'm keen to learn. If you would spend an hour with me and answer my 11 standard questions, that would help me work out what I wanted to do with my life. And I would put that in a book and share it with other young people. That's what I did. And then I made 5,500 phone calls over 3 months and got a whole bunch of these people, Ken Doan, Bob Hawke, Jeff Kennett, Jerry Harvey,
So
H.G. Nelson, to
big
speak to me.
names. Hmm.
Yeah, just very interesting people, and what they were from a very diverse, range of areas. And I got some great lessons out of that. And principally, what it helped me learn, you know, was that finding work that aligned with your own values and ultimately spending your efforts on helping other people be better off was really the ultimate way to be, to have meaning in your life
Hmm.
and, to be happy if you like. And so every day, if you're getting up and you know what you're doing is worthwhile and really making a difference to other people, then you sort of bounce out of bed. And, I think most of us haven't really found a great passion or a great reason to do anything much. And so a lot of us do a lot less, in terms of contribution to the world than we could, because frankly, we haven't found any great inspiration to do anything. And so that's what I learned. It's
Okay.
really the reason that you do something is very, very important. And if you have a good reason, then and that's a reason that, that's a
Gets you out
long-lasting
of bed.
reason. Yeah, then you've generally got a lot more energy than anyone else. And if you've got a lot more energy than anyone else, you're going to do a lot more than anyone else, and then you sort of win.
Well, you're obviously a driven individual and probably would have succeeded in anything you wanted to do, but what made you choose accounting?
So I had a father who had a business, and I was going to be a barrister. And his business, yeah, which is interesting. And his
I didn't
business,
know that about you.
yeah, it was very, very much damaged by an internal accountant that embezzled a lot of money. And so I was in year 10 at the time, and I was really intrigued as to how, the big firm that were auditing and the directors of the business couldn't understand or couldn't spot the fraud. And so I thought, well, look, if I ultimately, want to be in business or want to do anything, you need to understand numbers. So I thought I would go instead and study accounting. And then when I got into the profession, I realized that because I was working in private clients, that, you know, having seen the profound impact on my father of not being an accountant. So he was like, well, I didn't understand, the fraud, and I couldn't see that. I I saw the impact that had on him, and I thought, well, I could do firstly have the understanding myself, and then make sure that other people's families' businesses were properly looked after, because I'd sort of come to the view that accountants are often sort of all care, no responsibility. They don't really, I say, Michael, to a lot of people, a lot of young kids grow up saying one day I want to be a fireman, but few, if any, grow up from being a little kid and say, hey, I want to be an accountant. And
Mm.
so often you get people in the industry and they're just there for the money and the status. They don't give a rat's ass about the client. And they'll tell you that they do. But, what I've seen now over 27 years is that the quality of the actions are really how you should judge someone. So how well developed are the firms to specifically help the client rather than just ensure that the firm, makes a profit or makes a living. And often there's
Mm.
more emphasis on making a profit than really making building a business that can make a profound difference to the client. So what I guess I did was, when I started our firm in 2006 with my wife Beck, we just had this, unusual level of commitment to firstly have an environment where people could do their best work. And I thought if we focused on having the best people and then the best processes to help one type of client, a private client, then we would likely end up with the best clients and we would keep them for a long time. And so that's what we did. I really like people, which is also unusual. Like most technical people in technical professions, they're not really people, whereas I'm very much a people person. And so I said to myself, I very much wanted to have the best firm for people, and I wanted to have, the best systems for a private client.
You started the firm with your wife? Your wife was involved as well?
Yeah, so Beck, we had just, I first started having an ownership interest in a first firm in the Central Coast that was started by me and my mate Scott up in the Central Coast in March 2006 while I was working with another firm. And then that firm had made a partnership, to recruit me 12 months before. They had made promises around what the deal would be. And then when it came time to do the deal, they tried to change that deal. So I said to my wife, look, I don't think I can be in partnership with people that don't tell the truth as far as I'm concerned. And I think I'll either leave the profession or find something else to do. And to her credit, Beck said to me, Brett, really, you should just start a firm that isn't like the firms that you've worked in, because you're really good at it and people like you, and there's, I think you'd be really good at it. And the one that I'd started with Scotty up the Central Coast was going well. And it's quite interesting because then a couple of the people that worked with me had said, and I had an unusual situation where I owned my client base within the firm that I worked on the basis that if I became a partner, I would swap in my client base for equity. So, yeah. And so my two key people with me said to me, Brett, why don't you just start a firm? And so I think it's another interesting thing I've learned is that often, the people that you spend a lot of time with that know you well, they know you as well as often, especially as a young person, you know yourself, and they can see, you and know your talents and abilities. And when other people are saying to you, hey, why don't you think about this? Then it's worth listening to that because, they might see something about you that perhaps you would dismiss. Yeah. And look, everyone's got particular gifts and talents, and I knew that I had particular abilities, but I would sort of discount them on the basis that, well, kind of everyone has those, right? Yeah. Because you tend to think, well, everyone's kind of able to do whatever they do, like whatever you do, because you don't think your particular things are that, different. But the people near you, often they actually appreciate those talents more than you do.
So what allowed you to differentiate yourself, like in terms of your firm and sort of the service you provide when you first started out?
Look, I think firstly, I had this experience. I wrote this book at 22. I self-published the book. I raised the money, put the team together, and the book was a national #1 bestseller off the back of great publicity. I was on a current affair, and the book was launched at National Press Club to a live television audience of over 300,000 people. There were 4 million people that watched the current affair episode. I did over 2,000 professional speaking engagements in the 7 years after that. So by 2006, when I started the firm, I had written my first book in 1998.
So you were telling me before about children and kids sort of not choosing accounting. That's for sure. You certainly don't see kids running around saying they want to be an accountant when they grow up. So how do you think about a career in accounting? Like, what's your advice for anyone considering it?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So Michael, really what an accountant should do is help a client be organized, for them to help their client understand their own plans, and then help that client work towards their goals. And the compliance functions within that, whether it's a set of accounts, some type of compliance with ASIC or other audited standards, or anything, any other service that an accountant might provide, really should be within that framework if it's a private client. And so once you connect the work you do with the people's hopes, dreams, and aspirations for which you do that work, then there's a lot of meaning in the work because you're working for actual people rather than just working with a form. And so to me, that's the game, is remembering that when you look at the work you're doing, that you're working for a person and their family, not just form. And so if you really like helping people, and you think about the major challenges that people face in our community today, and one of the largest challenges people face is to understand their money and to use their money intelligently to provide for themselves and their families. And so basically an accountant can definitely help an individual and their family to reduce their financial stress by, essentially better accounting for and analysis of the utilization of that money. And so I think that's what people miss, is that accounting's not some academic exercise done for its own sake. You count things at the most basic level to know how many things you have and what you spent them on or where you've invested them, and to be a measure of progress. Now, there's a wonderful book by a Harvard professor, Dr. Teresa Amabile, and the book's called The Progress Principle. And fundamentally, it demonstrates that more than anything else, what people want in order to be motivated and have meaning in their lives is a sense of progress. It's much more important to people ultimately than money or power or status. And so for me, what I want to deliver for my people internally, for our people at Kelly+Partners, and for our clients is a sense of progress. And so that's the game. And now if you can do your work in that fashion, in that manner, that really helps your people with their careers and your clients make progress and understand the progress they're making, then you'll love what you're doing. And so I think that's the issue that accountants have had personally, is how do people find meaning in their work when they don't define their work in, I think, an accurate or a holistic way. They don't really understand why the work they do is valuable and meaningful.
What about if you, I guess the other thing that accountants that are, or people aspiring to be an accountant, especially out of uni, I guess the choice of whether you're going to tax or audit or insolvency or forensics, for example, or even commercial accounting. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you go about choosing the right path for yourself and finding meaning in those other paths? Because I see what you're saying in terms of the tax element and being an advisor to them, but a lot of accountants struggle with, say, audit. How do I find meaning in audit? Or
so audit is, it's a great question. So audit is, about ensuring the integrity of our financial system, and that person doing the audit's probably got a mother or a father, or at least knows someone whose superannuation's invested in one of these companies that someone's investing in. And so it should be quite obvious how important it is to ensure that companies are, accounts are in fact representative of the underlying financial reality of those businesses to the community. But where you have a community where people these days, their self-interest is so strong and they're so impressed and focused on themselves, that I believe makes it very difficult, for people to find meaning in the work they do. So if you're just looking at yourself, it's very hard to see anything else or anyone else or anything else of any value. And so it's important to take your eyes off your own self-interest and situation and focus very clearly on the difference what you're doing makes to other people. And look, it just goes to values. Most people today, if you think of your average modernist, they are individualistic, materialistic, hedonistic, and none of those things are good for people. And so ultimately, what good does it do for a person should they gain the whole world but lose themselves? And, I was 22, I lost my job. I was sent to Morgan & Bank's outplacement with a bunch of, on average, 55-year-old men. And these men were distraught. Somebody had taken their job and they had lost their entire selves. Their entire, the false construct of their entire life had been, totally demolished because they built themselves, their whole lives, around building themselves up, around their own money and their own status and their own ego. And look, at the end of the day, when you then lose a job, if you don't have anything else to yourself other than, your whole sense of self is based on your job performance. So, life's ultimately about values and choices. And, your values are your own choice, and very few people spend much time examining those. I was lucky. You lose a job. I was 22. I'm living at home. Every dollar I'd ever earned, I'd save. I was completely financially independent, thanks to my parents giving me a place to live. And so I had time to sit and read and study, what life was really about while I worked at completing my CA and doing my Masters of Tax. But my major work was a work on myself. There's another great American speaker. His saying is, education, formal education will make you a living, but self-education will make you a fortune. Really sitting down and studying the great minds of history and the great ideas, and thinking about, well, why do I think what I think? Why do I believe what I believe? Are those ideas and beliefs serving me? Are they delivering to me the outcomes that are ultimately valuable to me? Very, very few people do that. And so, most people are banging around through life. At some point, somebody taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, mate, you're about to die. And they wonder what they did with their lives. And so that was a very profound experience at a young age. I wrote that book in 98, and every 7 years since then, I've stopped and written a book. And just before we're on air, Michael, you said to me, where do you find time to write a book every 7 years? And the answer is, I make time because I think it's critical to stop, to pause, and to look at, where have I spent my last 7 years? Where do I want to spend my next 7 years? I had a brother die at 45. That happened when I was 30. And I said, most people live as if they're going to live to 105, but why don't you live such that if you, didn't have another week, another day, another month, you could look at your life and think that you lived in a way that reflected, integrity and you're living in accordance with your values. And so these are the big ideas that have really driven me to build our firm, that animate sort of the decisions that we make at Kelly+Partners in terms of, what we celebrate and what we pursue and how we operate our business. It's grounded in ideas around how do you make people better off, in that ensure they have meaningful work to do with people that they like, for clients that they respect. And, that means we're not as big as we could be if we just did any work for anyone. But, the flip side of that is we're doing okay, and, we're proud of the business that we've got and the people that we work with and the clients that we work for.
I think you're doing more than okay, Brett.
Well, that was the big experiment, Michael, was I would talk to people about these ideas, and most of them thought, Brett's a bit crazy. That's very Pollyanna-ish. You can't do well and do good at the same time. Now, that's less controversial today, thank goodness. But in 2006, when I started, the idea that you could conduct a business in a way that you would feel good about and also do well financially was a pretty radical idea. Most people thought, you just do anything for anyone. It's all about money and status and everything will take care of itself. Well, that's just never been our idea. And what I'm most proud of, I was actually asked, somebody said the other day, what are you most proud of about the business? I'm most proud about our people and the fact that they've pursued this higher, in my view, higher way of trying to, make a difference and make a living. And it's worked phenomenally well. And it continues to work well. And that's, to me, that's the ultimate reward.
There was an interesting thing I read, I think, in a book called Key Person of Influence the other day. And one of the startling comments that sort of made me ponder was, and it was actually referring to an accountant as an example of someone that's, chosen a career at the age of 18 and kind of 20 years later, sitting there frustrated, burnt out. And the statement the book made was, a lot of people live their lives, so 20 years, 40 years, etc., based on decisions their 17, 18-year-old self-made, 20, 30 years ago, and they're living that life based on that decision. Decision of a teenager, basically. And especially in Australia, where you have to choose what you want to do at uni, and it's a very kind of specific degree that you have to choose sort of beginning of year 12, really, before your HSC results come out. So I thought that was interesting and kind of speaks to what you said before. Not many people sit there and actually consider what they're doing and why they're doing it. And that probably is a reason why they feel unmotivated or unfocused.
No question. Like what what we tend to do, and I'm based in Sydney, so for listeners, we started Kelly+Partners Central Coast and North Sydney. In Sydney, we have 13 offices in what I call Greater Sydney, and one office in Melbourne, one in Hong Kong. So I've obviously got a Sydney, I grew up in Sydney, Sydney-centric view of the world. But, in Sydney, real estate's incredibly expensive. But, key to what I did in building the firm up and what I continue to do is I had an apartment at Kirribilli. I sold my apartment in Kirribilli, put the money into the business, and then I moved to Lane Cove and rented. Then I moved to St Mary's and rented Oxley Park and rented. Oxley Park, I lived there for 3 years. It's a suburb right next to Mount Druitt in outer western Sydney. Now, most people aren't prepared to sacrifice one thing in the short term for something else in the long term. And so most Sydney-sided friends of mine were buying houses that they couldn't afford to impress people that they didn't like and to house babies that they didn't have. And so that decision to have a 25-year mortgage on a very large mortgage on a larger property than you need at a time, because it essentially was a want, meant that they financially enslaved themselves and reduced their flexibility to do anything. And so, very key to our ability to grow the business is, in the middle of the word capitalism is the word capital. You actually need capital to build a business, and you can't be spending, money in your business if you've already spent it, on a house that at the time you don't need. So Beck and I were very careful, and I couldn't have done it without Beck's support, in that many of my mates' wives wouldn't work in wouldn't live in a less salubrious part of Sydney or anywhere else, and needed a very high material standard of living to make themselves feel good about themselves. Whereas Beck was like, well, we had Tom, was 9 months old when we started the firm, and then we had Nick, and she was very focused on raising the kids and helping me with the firm, and wasn't focused on, what car she drove or what handbag she had. And it's a real phenomenon in that, people are spending money. I get a lot of young guys say, look, I can't buy in to be a partner because I don't have any money. And I'm like, well, you do have money. It's just that you put it into a house, which is not a particularly economically productive asset. And, you got a 4-bedroom house, you got no children. What do you put in the bedrooms? So I think if you buy things that you don't need, as Warren Buffett says, then you end up having to, sell things you do need, or you're in a situation where you're just a slave to financial commitments that you've made. And I believe that's the reason that a lot of people don't get up out of bed with any real vigor in the morning, is that they've got these debts that they can't ever see a way that they'll be able to clear anytime soon. And the thrill of buying stuff lasts for moments, really. I had a great client, hundreds of millions of net worth, and he said, Brad, I buy a new car, and I want you to know this, any new car of any amount of money remains an exciting and new thing for approximately 12 weeks. And after that, it just becomes a car. And so if you know that, you'll make different decisions. So I've been beneficiary of the wisdom of an enormous amount of people that I've sought out through my books and also through the clients that we've attracted and looked after and that I've worked with over a long career now. And I'm a sponge for good information. But at the end of the day, I think that you have to come to your work with a huge amount of energy.
Yeah.
And energy is not often spoken about as a source of competitive advantage. But in the first 18 months of starting our business, I never got to the office later than 3:30 a.m. in the morning. And I never once left before 6 p.m. I would go home at 6, have dinner, and by 7 p.m. I would be working in my garage until 11. Then I would go to sleep. I would wake up at 3, give Thomas, who was our young child at that point, to Beck to feed, have a shower, and go to work and get down to work by 3:30. I live 10 minutes from the office.
I read that about you, which is not something most people can model.
So you do that for 6 days a week for, I did that for at least 18 months, and it was, and then I would never get to the office after 6 a.m. for probably the next 5 years. And I certainly didn't have a holiday for about 7 years.
How do you structure your day these days?
Yeah, so from the beginning, I've always done a calendar a year in advance. I've got, I learned from a guy called Michael Hill, who founded Michael Hill Jewelers, to have a 30-year plan. It's written down. It's in a big spreadsheet: 10-year plan, 5-year plan, 1-year plan. What are you going to do this quarter? What are you going to do this day? What are you going to do this week? It's all color-coded, full calendar for the whole year on the desk. And then the game from there is let's just focus on, you know, what an ancient saint, St. Thomas Aquinas, talked about, right order rather than work-life balance. So work-life balance is kill somebody one day, be a saint the next day, and on average you're a good bloke. Whereas right order means let's have a look at what's most important, next most important, next most important, and then schedule your time and money according to the things that are ultimately most important. And so I had a business coach when I was about 21. He was a real estate coach, actually, and his name was Dr. Fred Gross. He talked about dollar productive activity, and he just said, just do the things that are dollar productive and outsource everything else. And so, you know, as I looked to grow the business, I made sure that everything that I didn't have to do personally that wasn't revenue generating, I wouldn't touch. And so while I didn't have timesheets for myself ever, I just did business development and systems development, you know, for the business. I just focused on the main three things. And there's, you know, in terms of all the things that have influenced me, there's a great American speaker, and he said you know, between my first book and, well, when I did my first book, I bought the full Simon & Schuster self-help tape catalog, which was over 2,000 tapes, and listened to them. And one of these guys told this story that, you know, he sold a great idea for $1 million in the 1930s to some stupidly wealthy man. And he said to this man, look, if I could make you much, much more productive, you know, double your productivity, would you pay me $1 million? The guy said yes. And he said, okay, what is it? So he took out a palm card and he said, right, I want you to write every day for the next 21 days the 3 most important things that you must complete tomorrow on that palm card, and do it the night before, and start them as the first things that you do in the morning, and don't do anything else until you finish them. Mm-hmm. And anyway, 21 days later, so it says legend, turned up, the guy was so happy, paid him $1 million. And so that always struck me. I was a young guy and I thought, wow, that's amazing. But that's what I do. It's what I've always done. I basically, the night before, a great day starts the night before, write down the 3 things that you must do the next day. A lot of us have got a huge amount on, but if you do the must-dos, the sort of kind of have-to-dos will take care of themselves. And most of us, we put the must-dos to the bottom of the list. We don't typically
you do the
start with those. Well, you do the easy stuff. Yeah. Most people, they do the easy stuff first. They run out of day, and then they say, geez, I was really meant to do that thing and I didn't do it. So for me, that's talk to our people, talk to our clients, work on the business, on the systems, on the next gen strategy, talent pipeline, where are we growing, how are we growing? So, what Stephen Covey called the big rocks. And, if you get the big rocks down, you can work on the other stuff quite easily. And then that leads a level of, with that level of energy. But Warren Buffett's a real hero of mine, and I saw him and Bill Gates interviewed together, and they were asked, if you had to tell a young guy what's the number one thing that would make the most difference to their life and business, they both in unison said focus. And I think that's true. So a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of focus will get most jobs done for people and would dramatically change their results.
To say focus, but these days with all the distractions around us on social media, how do you personally do it, and how are you meant to maintain that high level of focus?
Yeah, so I think, at the end of the day, the most valuable resource you have is your own mind. And so...
how do you block out all the distractions in your life and just have that?
Yeah, it's interesting, Michael. Like, I've got 7 brothers. I was raised in a family of 8 boys.
Wow. Right
in the middle. And so I feel like, firstly, there's a level of resilience that I think people from large families typically have, because it's, it's mayhem comparably to other situations. And secondly, I've read over 3,000 books, listened to God knows how many tapes, spent time with some of the world's greatest achievers. And out of all of that, there were 2 enormous lessons. One was, you must control your mental state. You are the author of your thoughts. Your thoughts will lead to your actions will lead to your habits, and your habits are your destiny. So I am all about what goes in my brain is my choice. So if you put shit in your mouth, you'll end up fat. If you put shit in your brain, you'll end up stupid, or depressed or deranged. or not as effective as you could be. Choose whatever language makes you feel comfortable. I'm sharing language that I share internally in my brain. You know, I'd say to myself, eat shit, get fat. Right? That's how I talk to myself internally. You know, I might be more polite externally. You know, if you make bad food choices, you'll get bad fitness outcomes. I don't know that language that's more sterile is more effective, to be fair. So when I'm speaking to myself, you know, and the story that you tell yourself is the most important one, then I'm very careful to control what I watch on TV, what I listen to, who I spend time with, because your mental state, like your physical, you know, your spiritual, your financial state, it tends to end up a reflection of the people. I always say the 7 people that you spend the most time with. And so one of those people is yourself. The other 6 are either the radio, the TV, the YouTube, the podcast, your friends, your family, whoever. Now, if you went through and did a bit of an audit on your brain over the last 10 days and said, right, who have I spent the most time with physically? Who have I spent the most time with mentally? What's actually going into my mind? Then I can tell you, if you change the quality of the input, you'll change the quality of the output. And so for me, it's all about managing the brain. If I can get good stuff in the brain, I've got energy, I've got great ideas, I've got great thoughts, I've got huge mental discipline to run that approach. And then the second one is, you know, you can't do anything by yourself. So you have to be expert at working with other people. And so that's the game. And so if you can surround yourself with great people, then ultimately your greatest leverage is with people, because most people are living far beyond their own potential. You know, Nelson Mandela was once somebody's employee. Steve Jobs was once somebody's employee. How do you feel if you were their boss and you treated them like shit? Pretty stupid. So, you know, I worked for bosses where I thought, you know, I was there. I was an employee keen to contribute, but it was like I was working for people that didn't want me to. So that's, you know, that's the game, is if you can get your brain right, your actions will follow. And if you continually remind yourself that it's through great teams that great things are achieved, you know, through people working together, then, you know, you've got opportunity.
Sorry to interrupt. I guess I want to ask you, you know, you speak a lot about the growth and the journey so far. What have been some of the biggest challenges and, I guess, pain points for you to date, especially with Kelly+Partners?
Look, so the biggest challenge, I think, in building a firm is first convincing yourself that your ideas are valid, and then backing yourself to insist on those ways of doing things. So as an example, when I started, I wanted to do a couple of things with the clients that were very unusual at the time. So every client on a fixed fee, 50% upfront, 50% on completion. I didn't want to have debtors. So I wouldn't lodge a tax return until we were paid. I wouldn't start a job until 50% was paid, and then I wouldn't lodge until we were paid. What that meant was that I didn't have anyone collecting debtors. I didn't have any arguments about fees because the argument was had up front, and that was considered radical and controversial. But all of the clients we put on accepted that, were excited by that. In fact, the certainty it gave them and the commitment it showed from us to deliver on time and on budget. And so it's things like that. I wanted a culture where we just saw you as a person. You know, we don't run diversity programs in any way, shape, or form. The entire firm has always been run as a meritocracy, and our diversity outcomes are better than any comparable firm. Last year, we were acknowledged as best firm for women with revenues under 50 million by AFR, for example. But we never did that by some sort of conscious.
So what were the biggest challenges? Like, what were the?
That was a big challenge, to just see people, to say, you know, this person's great. They might not have the standard background. They might not have the things that a lot of other people would recruit them on. They didn't come from the right suburb or the right school or the right this, but they had great values and they shared our vision of really working in the interest of the clients, doing what they say, working as part of a team. And so let's back in those people. Now, in any of these businesses, the primary challenge is finding a large quantity of amazing people and on a continual basis. And so that is by far and away every business of our nature's greatest challenge. Was in the beginning and continues to be. It's getting easier, I must say, but building the systems, internal systems and processes to be able to scale the business, people and systems, to me, the biggest challenges in this type of business.
And what sort of systems have you chosen to sort of allow you to scale both the people side and the business side?
Yeah, so Michael, very determined. So at Kelly+Partners, we're proud to be a very fast follower. We're not, an early adopter of technologies in particular. Often in our industry, there's a lot of fadism where there's a fad, so everyone jumps on a fad. We tend to commit, if we're using any particular system, we say we want to be the number one user of that product, that software, or that process, in the world. So we will push ourselves to do the best implementation and to fully wring a full capability out of any type of system or process that we operate within the business. And that was really unusual, right? Like when we started, I built systems that could handle 50 million of revenues up front. And everyone said, but Brett, you don't even have 500,000 of revenues. What do you need systems for 50 million? And I said, well, listen,
give me a few years.
Yeah, you need to begin with the end in mind is, a great line from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Work out where you want to be, when you grow up, who you want to be when you grow up, and start in that way because, if you get fat, it's hard to get fit. So that's kind of my mindset was let's put the infrastructure in place and do things in a robust way so that you can continually grow. So that's the game.
You do a lot of acquisitions and tuck-ins, I guess. What are the 3 things that you change straight away in terms of systems or processes that have the greatest impact?
So it's a great question. So we have grown the business on average at 35% as a cumulative average growth rate every year for 14 years. We've doubled the business 4 times in a row on average every 3 years. And we've done that 50% organic, 50% by acquisition. Because of my corporate advisory background, I believed that I had a skill set that was unusual, a deal-making skill set that was unusual for an accountant to apply in our industry. And secondly, an unusual insight that I believe that there was a huge challenge with accountants internally getting the old guys and the young guys to do a deal together.